It's very important, I think, for directors to keep their ears open and their minds open to the suggestions of those around them. When I was crewing, I saw a lot of directors who seemed a little reluctant to do that, and I thought much to their own detriment. I think that stems from a certain insecurity. I am not at all shy about saying, wow, what a great idea, we're using that. I'm also not at all shy about saying, you know, gosh, I'm at a bit of a loss here. I'm not the be-all and end-all expert. The creative process is one of using your instincts, day-to-day, moment by moment. You can't have all the answers predetermined because it's such a fluid process. It's always in flux. And so if you're smart, you will ride that flux. You will be willing to be fluid, and you will recognize those good ideas and solicit them, indeed, from your colleagues. That's not to say, of course, that you shouldn't be prepared. I find that there's no amount of preparation that is wasted in the planning stages of the film. The last thing you want to do is be standing there on the day of filming wondering what you want to do, or where to put the camera, or where to point it, or how to stage the actors. I find that there's an enormous advantage in preparing as thoroughly as possible. Things will change. That flux will happen. The universe will try to work against you, but at least you will have a basis from which to proceed.
I remember my first night. Seems like a long...
Here we're back in the cell block set, the one that was in the warehouse. And what's always been very interesting to me about this scene is it shows how much you can suggest with sound. You actually don't see many people in this entire sequence. Really only your principals and a few people across the tiers. We didn't have that many extras here while we were shooting this because we didn't really need them. What we did instead was suggest with sound and looping in post-production that there was a whole bunch of guys in this cell block participating in the taunting of the new fish and the subsequent chanting and the yells. So we had maybe a dozen people on this cell block set, but we suggested quite a bit with sound.
While you're there, I can hear you breathing. I know you listen to these nitwits, you hear me? This place ain't so bad. Tell you what, I'll introduce you around, make you feel right at home.
You don't understand. I'm not supposed to be here.
Open that cell.
This bit of screen violence was kind of interesting to me because I didn't want to do the typical Hollywood thing of going in for the big sweaty close-ups and the big shaky camera thing and, you know, the head whipping around as blood sprays and all that stuff. What I wanted to do really with this is make more of a comment about the environment. I wanted to show it from a wide perspective, so what you're really looking at is almost like figures in a landscape. You're looking at just what's occurring in this metal environment, this horrible place. I also had the Rodney King beating in mind, frankly, because I found that watching that was so much more disturbing, almost objectively from a distance, like figures in a landscape, was so much more disturbing than if they had done the Hollywood close-ups. I just wanted a nice, elegant, wide, static shot of that cell block while this was going on. And the net result of that was, I think that it disturbed people even more than if I had gone in for all the close-ups. In the rape here of Andy, I always thought I really wanted to have the camera sort of leave, like sort of a Victorian lady averting her eyes from something really unpleasant. I figured the really raw, you know, male rape of all time had already been done in Deliverance. And indeed, the tonality of this particular film didn't seem to lend itself to that. So I thought, let's just leave certain things to the viewer's imagination. Look, this snow here, the snow, potato flakes. I knew that somewhere in the movie I absolutely had to have, I mean, it spans, what, 20 years? I thought I had to have one scene in snow, just for passage of time's sake. We shot that one day in the shadow of the prison yard. Actually, it was a really bright sunny day, but we shot in the shadow, and we had tons of potato flakes being blown through by fans, just to help texturally the film a little bit. This scene here is probably a very good example of why we couldn't shoot in a real cell block. You need some place for the crew to be, for the camera to be. It's an enormous camera. What you need to have in a situation like this are walls that actually are removable. We say, fly the wall. That means pull the damn wall out. The back wall of this cell is missing at this very moment, and there's a whole crew and a camera right there. When you come around, then you put that wall back in, and then you move the other wall out to give, again, the camera and the crew someplace to be, and also to set lights. Absolutely could not have done that in a real cell block. A, the walls don't move. B, our fake cell here is actually much more generous in terms of space than the real cells. Those real cells were about 6 foot by 9 foot, and they were two-man cells. Really unlivable. You could really see why they pulled the plug on the real prison. One of the things you actually have to think about when you're making a movie, particularly when you wind up being in the same space repeatedly through various scenes in the movie, how do you make that same place look different photographically? How do you approach that? We had our mess hall scenes throughout this entire movie. We tried to make them each just slightly different in some fashion, not just in the lighting, but also in the way that they were shot. This was pretty much broken up into very simple 2 shots, kind of a 2 + 2 = 4 simplicity to it, just to get the dialogue on screen. There are other times we shot this mess hall that are a little more stylistic, a little different here and there. We didn't want the audience to feel like they were trapped in prison, like the characters were. This is a good example of sort of the passage of time technique with voiceover narration. I have to admit that I didn't really pattern anything specifically after it, but when I was in Ohio shooting this movie on Sundays, we were shooting 6-day weeks, I would wake up on Sundays and just be so out of it, and what I would do is A, my laundry, and B, just watch Goodfellas again and again. I was very much watching Goodfellas, just sort of inspiration, really. I knew that I had taken a bit of a chance with all this narration in the movie. It was a little popular at that time to slam films with narration. I don't think narration in and of itself is really a bad thing. It's pointless narration that kind of sucks. For example, Blade Runner, one of my all-time favorite movies. Boy, did it not need that narration. And boy, am I glad they eventually eliminated it. But when narration actually winds up being a legitimate tool of the storytelling, then why not? And actually, it was Goodfellas that taught me that. I remember when I was actually writing the script and writing all this narration into it, I thought, oh my gosh, am I making a terrible mistake somehow? Am I really screwing this up by telling instead of showing? So I froze about halfway through the script, feeling rather insecure about that aspect of it. And I turned on cable that night, and as if a sign from above, what were they playing? Of course, Goodfellas, which I hadn't seen in about a year at that point. And watching Goodfellas again really gave me all the courage I needed to press on, because I thought, wow, this is nothing but wall-to-wall voiceover narration and brilliantly executed bits of passage of time where years would pass literally in a few shots. And I thought, I'm a total piker compared to Martin Scorsese. I don't have nearly the amount of narration that he does. It was really nice to see that. Sometimes drawing inspiration from an unexpected place like that can help you get through a script. I guess the message in that is that there are no inappropriate tools in storytelling, really. It's what your instinct tells you is right, and that's the direction you should go. I did, by the way, write the script for Shawshank Redemption in 8 weeks. It's certainly a script I had thought about for a number of years. I had gotten the rights from Stephen King some years prior to that. But the actual process of writing took me 8 weeks. I tend to write very intensively. I tend to spend 10, 12 hours a day at the computer when I'm really going at it. I am willing really to be a prisoner of the process and not leave the house. I remember once going 3 days straight with a lot of coffee and a few naps on one deadline. Not necessarily the most mentally healthy way to go about it, but it's certainly the way that works for me. It's very much an all or nothing. I'm either there doing it or I'm not. I was never one of these writers who could go out and have lunch and play tennis and then come home and write a few more pages. I just can't seem to do that. For me, it's a complete commitment situation, which is why I wind up sometimes writing a script in 8 weeks. I had the same situation on The Green Mile. That also was an 8-week job from beginning to end, an intense writing experience. Now here's the warden's outer office, another little bit of clever art department here. These walls, this door, this is all built in. This was just a big open area in front of the warden's office. We actually wanted to enclose it and turn it into an outer office proper. I just point this out because I always get a big kick out of the fact that people, when they're watching a movie, just take things at their face value. And indeed, that's the way it should be. They shouldn't be sitting there trying to analyze how clever we were in creating some sort of illusion like there was an outer office here when there, in fact, wasn't. But yet, credit where credit is due. Behind all those invisible things that you don't see, there's a lot of people who spent a lot of time and a lot of effort actually creating this illusion, putting up those walls, hanging that door. They're really the unsung heroes of what we do. You wonder why movies are so time-intensive and so expensive and why there's so many names at the end of a film in those credits. Well, because every little aspect of this somebody had to accomplish. And they're all looking to you, the director, to give them that guidance and solicit their input and their contribution. Which is why a director winds up answering roughly 10,000 questions a day. Everybody is looking to you, the director, for the creative vision of the film and looking to come up with the solutions to help you implement that creative vision. You're very much like the captain of a ship deciding what direction everybody is sailing, and the crew is looking to you to provide that guidance. This is sort of a signature scene of the movie here. The playing of the opera, I've been asked where this came from. It does not exist in Steve King's story. This is one of those things that it's a flow of the creative process, in my opinion. It's sort of what I consider to be the jazz of what we do. You plug into something and you just flow with it. The truth is, when I was writing this script, I was just at that point getting into opera. I was listening to a lot of opera while I was writing. I tend to like to listen to music while I write. Not every day. Some days I need absolute quiet, but a lot of the time I actually write to music. I find that inspires and informs the process for me, sometimes more blatantly than other times. This is a great example of that. It's a rather blatant example of that, actually, because I was listening to The Marriage of Figaro while I was writing this movie and feeling trapped, imprisoned at my computer. I would listen to The Marriage of Figaro. I would listen to this one duet specifically, and my heart would soar. I would get an emotional reaction out of it, and that's where the entire idea of this scene came from, was just literally having my heart uplifted by this music and the tears that brought to my eyes. And this whole scene just really sprang from that. I thought, well, we're going to play a little jazz here. We're just going to work a scene into this movie based on this emotional reaction that I had listening to this music while I was writing, and see what happens. Fascinatingly enough, this has become really a signature scene for the movie. So many people come up to me and say, oh, I love the scene where he plays the opera, the opera, the opera. What a nice result that is. That emotional reaction that I had, I was able to pass on to the people who viewed the movie and share that with them, and it worked for them. As a sidelight, the specific performance also made quite a difference. When I first told people we're going to be using this music for this part of the movie, they went out and bought a version of it. And that's what they first played back for me, and it wasn't the same at all. And I said, no, we've got to use the exact same piece that I wrote to. It has to be the same vocalists, the same conductor, literally that performance. And that's when the magic came back into the sequence.
On your feet.
Here's a great example, this scene of the learning process that I went through as a director, learning kind of from my colleagues. You'll notice where I was looking at this sequence here and thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to shoot this? How am I going to shoot this mess hall? See, here's another mess hall scene. How do I shoot this? Everybody's got dialogue. Do I shoot singles? Do I shoot doubles? It could take me all day to shoot this thing, and I've got until lunch. And here's where Roger Deakins really not just saved the filming day, but also gave me a much more elegant solution to that problem. You'll notice this whole thing is one shot with one reverse on Morgan Freeman. It took what could have been a lot of coverage and a very cutty scene, and it boiled it down to 2 shots. The ensemble around the table, well, you know these guys by now. You don't necessarily need to see everybody's face as each one of them is saying their lines. What I love about this is we start off on this very elegant wide angle and do a very, very, very slow drift into a single on Tim. And all the people around the table who are talking literally just drop off the frame. In other words, we're focusing the entire scene down to the 2 people who count the most, the 2 people who are providing our thematic premise, not just of the scene, but of the whole movie, Tim and Morgan. So the guys just kind of drop out of it as we go. And I thought that was such an elegant solution, and not just a great concession to the amount of time I had to shoot it, but also just a more positive, creative solution. Sometimes when you have to make those decisions under duress, you wind up doing more elegant things than you would have otherwise if you had all the time in the world to shoot it. And I have Roger Deakins to thank for that lesson. It was a wonderful learning experience working with him.